Underdogs are bound to spring up in any competitive space, but when everything is determined by viewer votes, you might think that it'd be really hard for there to be a true underdog in BFDI. Like, regardless of challenge performance, it's easy to expect that the less popular characters are obviously going to be taken out before the top dogs, but that isn't always the case, because with some luck, a character like Bottle can duck under the radar and make an unexpectedly deep run. Despite being a joke character with a goofy personality and much less prevalence in any storylines or arcs, the journey Bottle takes throughout BFB and TPOT is an interesting one through how she was able to scrape by a bunch of eliminations to then have a major surge in popularity that was still outclassed by her competition. And with how fresh her elimination is, there's no better time to take a look at how she was able to make it as far as she did. So with that, let's dive into the rise and fall of Bottle in Teapot. Our story begins in not BFB, but BFDIA. She was eligible to join the season, but ended up getting absolutely pummeled by everyone else with 29 votes to join, the second lowest amount, only above Bracelety's 18. Now, people back then only had her design to go off of, but clearly they did not care about her. So much so that in IDFB1's vote to see who'd be the first to let out of the TLC, she gained one singular vote, getting 30. That's the least out of everybody, which really hammers home that on design alone, nobody gave a damn about Bottle. I mean, the low votes in BFDIA isn't too surprising, but I find that IDFB performance to be unexpected, since I do like the simple, translucent milk bottle look she has. But all this is to say that going into BFB1, Bottle was walking into an uphill battle, and her chances of surviving long term would be made or broken by her personality. And honestly, based on the first few episodes of BFB, I wouldn't say her future was looking bright for a couple of reasons, namely because of her team. After chatting it up with Donut about some time travelers, she joins Pie, Lie, and Black Hole at the same time as Tree and Pillow before they recruit Remote and Pen to form Death Pact, as coined by Bottle. What's so unlucky about this team is that it's very balanced, having more reeled-in characters to bounce off the eccentric or silly ones like Bottle, and in Vote to Eliminate, those characters definitely stand out more as targets people would try to take out. Bottle herself doesn't help her case either, because in these first 4 episodes of BFB, she feels very quirky and is bordering on awkward. I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, so let me try to describe it. You see, Bottle's personality is very bubbly, fun, and positive with that sideways smile, but her always having a cheery tone, even in the face of death, was giving mixed signals to me when I first watched the season. Is she just positive, maybe a little oblivious, or are we supposed to see her as having some screws loose? Now, that isn't to say her bits of screen time are bad, like what she does get is fine, and makes sense knowing that Bottle really is just happy, and isn't in the same boat as Pillow, unless you want to make some theories, but she doesn't get enough time to really establish her personality, or even make a big impact on both her team and the season early on. Black Hole, Pen, and Tree have much more of a presence in the challenges, as they get through the first 3 episodes with no struggle, before they totally flop in BFB4, and Death Pact gets put up for elimination. This is the first real vote for Bottle, and she doesn't do too hot. Pen, Pillow, Remote, Tree, and Black Hole are all relatively close to each other in votes, leaving Bottle, Lie, and Pie in the bottom 3. Bottle is safe next though, hovering a few hundred votes over Black Hole, but being in the clear against the gal who literally didn't show up last episode in Pie, and the one everyone voted out with Lie. She may have been a decent bit away from the bottom 2, but this still doesn't look good for Bottle's long-term chances. Had Death Pact lost more often, I think she'd survive over Pie, and maybe people would have turned against someone like Pillow. But against everyone else, Bottle was not looking to be in a good position on Death Pact. Fortunately for her though, This is Deathpack's only loss in the whole season, meaning that we can cork any worry of Bottle getting eliminated for a big chunk of episodes. And while she may not be at risk for the rest of BFB, there are still some interesting things to talk about with Bottle in this season, as I think she slowly starts to feel more consistent. That awkwardness I talked about washes away as she stays chipper throughout so many episodes, and I stopped being unsure what the writers were going for once I realized that she really is just a goofy gal. We also get some small glimpses at other parts of her character, like how she can be prone to panicking or worrying in spots like BFB 4 or BFB 7 after everyone turns on a loser. It's this very episode where Tree gets stuck inside her, which isn't really a big change, but it does give Bottle some more crumbs of screen time, with scenes showing how she could be pretty airheaded, with not minding that Tree is trapped, and chatting with 4 and BFB 11 instead of focusing on the challenge. All these scenes for sure do a better job at characterizing Bottle, but in general, because Deathpack never loses another challenge, and hardly comes close to losing, they, and by extension Bottle, don't really get a ton of focus, especially in late pre-split. In BFB 12, all that matters is Tree, if you take the REE and replace it with an ACO, shattering and escaping her. And in the Emerald Saga, her and her team try to rescue Pillow from 4, and are stuck in the forest till BFB 15, which already brings us to the split. Bottle actually does get some attention here, by pointing out Spongy's size getting melted by lava, before finally choosing to ditch 4 to join TPOT, ending her run in BFB. So when judging Bottle's overall run on BFB, I'd say she's aggressively okay, fine, neutral, don't care. Really, all the ways you could say whatever. She starts in a strange spot, and while she does become more well-realized, and has fun moments along the way, she is still very forgettable to me. Like, she's got a lot of competition with all the other jokey characters BFB has, and compared to them and the lower amount of screen time she gets, I personally just didn't care much about Bottle and BFB. Still, there were definitely other people who did, as in the BFB 13 popularity poll, she was near the middle of the pack, getting more votes than her teammates in Pillow, Pie, and tying with Lie, while being far away from the upper half of Deathpack. So what happened between then and now? Did Teapot do her like Snowball and give her exactly what she needed to make it far? Well, not quite, because while Teapot does throw Bottle a few bones, she spends the majority of this season in a weird zone of barely scraping by. So let's just dive into why that is, starting with her new team. While Tree, Black Hole, Remote, and Pie all stay loyal to the Pact, Bottle jumps ship when she realizes that she'd rather be on a fun team, and swaps over to the S as the last member to join the hexalogy of Winner, Yellowface, Ice Cube, Rocky, Cloudy, and Clock. Right off the bat, this team makeup is another tricky one for Bottle, since now it's vote to save, and this team is filled to the brim with jokey or energetic characters, which could easily make her fall into the background and starve Bottle of the attention she'd need to survive. Like, beyond switching teams, Bottle doesn't do much outside of her usual comedy of being happy and breaking in Teapot 1, and does the same thing in Teapot 2, aside from a brief chat with Winner involving Clock, that thankfully leads her to a more notable role in Teapot 3. You see, while making a stage out of blocks for the challenge, Clock is enamored, dazzled, starstruck by the idea of Winner doing some kind of performance, even though Yellowface is already designated as the MC for the night. Bottle sees that Winner really isn't a fan of Clock pushing them to put on a show, and tells Clock that he shouldn't push Winner into doing something they aren't comfortable with before getting pushed herself and staying dead for the rest of the episode. Now, from a character perspective, I think there are two ways to look at this scene. The boring way is that Bottle only did this because she was literally the only good option on the team to try to talk to Clock. Like, Yellowface is off the table, Rocky ain't doing it, Ice Cube was only talking with reused lines, and I think Cloudy would just be a strange pick, leaving Bottle as the only choice. Still, that semi-plausible reading of this scene is hella boring, and the way more interesting one is that Bottle recognizing this messy situation before it boils over shows some emotional intelligence from her. She may not be passing a basic math test, but she is thoughtful and aware of how people around her are feeling despite seeming oblivious. It's a part of her character that isn't explored too often, but given how she recognized that she'd rather be on a fun team in Teapot 1, and some small cases of her being considerate later down the road, tells us Bottle may be smarter than she appears. Alright, from there we head into Teapot 4, and wait a minute, we have an elimination to get to because Clock wasn't paying attention to Bottle, and ended up costing the S the W. So how does Bottle do? Well, not great. Yellowface, Winner, and Rocky are well above her in votes, Clock is decently above her, and she barely avoids the bottom two with a couple hundred more votes than Ice Cube. She may have done something notable, but it still didn't break her curse of doing badly in voting. The silver lining is that Bottle was well above Cloudy, but she's not out of the danger zone yet because his departure doesn't even give Bottle more of a chance to shine. Since starting this episode, the S, and in turn Bottle, kind of fade into the background for a bit. She could still be fun when she does get time to be her happy self in Teapot 4, 5, and 6, but the S simply not getting a lot of focus is a big bane for her, and after spending Teapot 6 chasing a chocolate ball and getting stuck in a pit before they lose, I wouldn't say this vote looked too good for Bottle, especially with her closest competition last time in Ice Cube finally getting a new VA. Once again though, Bottle was able to pull through, yet Teapot 7 marks the most danger she had ever been in. Almost everyone is over 1,000 votes ahead of her, placing Bottle in the bottom two against Clock, who does get totally destroyed by her. It's to the point where the episode doesn't even acknowledge Bottle was in the bottom two, but I'd say her survival was more due to Clock falling off, in a similar way to Loser and BFB post-split, with how his Teapot 3 plot had gone nowhere in the past 3 episodes. I just don't think Bottle spending most of Teapot 6 stuck in a pit really drew in a ton of new fans, but at least those fans who voted for Bottle could totally relax for a while now that she survived. Which brings us to the challenge where Bottle is pretty active. She naturally stands out more on the S now that they've lost 2 members, and from here on out, I'd say Bottle slowly starts to ramp up in relevance and get into a solid flow state of always being a fun presence that's no longer stuck in the background. She provides a distinct positive energy, and is able to work well on her own, and with her remaining team members, even without any big dynamics or arcs. Like, her involvement with Clock was neat, but even without having major connections, she could still be a really good comic relief character. That does come with an asterisk, since I think as the cast gets smaller, Bottle's lack of dynamics does become something to nitpick, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Because Bottle finds the Moon repair kit, which would have totally given them the win, and stopped one from escaping the moon, had Yellowface not completely sold, causing them to lose twice in a row, and ending the relaxation of those Bottle fans. Just like last time, I'd say this vote looked a bit treacherous for Bottle, given how far she was from everyone left on her team, but simply having more breathing room for her joy to be noticed, and probably some more interest in her survival after being in the bottom two, gave Bottle just what she needed to pull through in Teapot 8. It also helps a lot that Rocky just bummed around in Teapot 7. Like, Bro did actually nothing in the challenge, which got him eliminated, but Bottle was still able to dodge being in a back-to-back bottom two, doing better than Ice Cube while still being far from the heights of Winner and Yellowface. Now the team is super small, which gives Bottle even more breathing room to be her cheery self, and since the S doesn't lose anymore before the team swap, she finally gets to relax and vibe for the next 3 episodes. I don't have anything else to say on Teapot 8, but I really like her interactions with Black Hole and her team in Teapot 9, And while she doesn't do much in Teapot 10, in the wake of Clock and Winner finishing their arc, it does bring Winner and Bottle a tad closer together, which actually will be expanded on in like 7 episodes. So yeah, that wraps up Bottle's pre-team swap journey, and while she does spend a lot of time in the background, like she did in BFB, she starts to get into a groove by the end, and to me is much better than she was in BFB, while still not being amazing. It's not till after this team swap where things start to get really interesting for her, as even though I've talked about Bottle for over 15 minutes now, we haven't even reached the true start of Bottle's rise in popularity. With the teams jumbled, Bottle ends up being around a lot of fresh faces on Bagged, with Pen, Needle, TB, TV, and BB. This crew doesn't even matter for Bottle in this episode though, as Eraser starting to beef with her is the main thing they set up, and I think it's okay. Bottle herself works well enough as a beacon of positivity to clash with Eraser's burning anger, and in this episode specifically, they are fun together, but Eraser just got done with a rivalry with Teardrop, so it ends up feeling a bit redundant, and doesn't even end up lasting very long because of his TPOT 14 elimination. Wait, I shouldn't miss that transition back there, because you know what else might sound redundant? Bagged loses this challenge, and this vote does not look promising for Bottle. Everyone else either got more focus, more setup even with the Eraser stuff, or were simply considered more popular than her, leading to most people thinking that would be Bottle or TV kicking the bucket here. Both were in kinda similar boats going into Teapot, where they weren't expected to make deep runs, and while they had done better than expected, they were now both pegged as being the most likely members of Bagged to be stomped out of the game here. And that's what makes this next vote really engaging to look at, considering they both survive, because while TV's survival led to a flare-up of his hate base, Teapot 13 marks the start of Bottle gaining real momentum in becoming more popular. That isn't very reflective in this vote though, as Tennis Ball, Pen, Basketball, and TV all soar well above Bottle in terms of votes, and yet she must have had a 4-leaf clover, deal with the devil, ulted, did something, I don't know, because Bottle survives over Needle in a shocking result. This was not expected at all, given how much Needle did in Teapot 12, and the electrified effect of this outcome caused my GOAT TV to be zapped by a bunch of hate, with people saying that he should have gone out instead. Bottle, on the other hand, wasn't looked at with nearly as much scorn, which might be because TV was a better scapegoat, having already received hate in Teapot 9's elimination, or it could be because this is a really good episode for Bottle, and people were fine with her sticking around. You see, Bagged has to get rid of a giant David, and while Tennis Ball and TV work on a method to lure him away, Pen, Bottle, and new team member Lai need to steal milk from 2 so they could put him to sleep. They make for a fun trio, with how Bottle bounces off their more grounded personalities, and she gets to have a lot of fun moments with them in this stormy environment. It goes deeper than this episode just being a good one for Bottle though, as this team composition feels like a big help. Outside of TV, everyone has a less silly personality, making her shenanigans stand out more against their groundedness, without Bottle running the risk of becoming a target like she could have in Vote to Eliminate. She's definitely in her element this episode, with providing comedy, but Teapot 14 and 15 shouldn't be ignored either, since I find Bottle to also be great in them, and they certainly contributed even more to her rise in popularity. Both episodes are very challenge-based, meaning that character growth is secondary to the action set pieces or major stakes involved with said challenge. Some peeps, like Basketball, Fanny, or Donut, can be left without much to do since they thrive way more off of personal conflicts, but Bottle doesn't rely on deep interactions to be a successful character. She provides good vibes and comedy, both of which she does really well in these episodes, to the point where in Teapot 15's elimination, she's able to slip by the bottom 2 yet again by narrowly getting more votes than TV, both of whom completely dunked on basketball's voting numbers. And just like in TPOT 13, Bottle didn't even get negative press from surviving over basketball, because most people were now really appreciating Bottle for the energy she was providing to both Bagged and TPOT as a whole. Still, the key word there is most, because while Bottle was very much on the rise, if you don't like her style of humor, then nothing in these episodes is really gonna win you over. She didn't have a big hate base or anything, but it's important to establish the other side now, because the amount of people done with her would reach its peak at the same time Bottle's popularity would also be reaching its peak in TPOT 17. Before I get there though, I should say that her bit in TPOT 16 is kinda funny, but she also doesn't really do anything aside from hiding behind a door and emoting, so let's just move on to her biggest episode. It all starts with her snatching the voting results folder, as 4 and X are busy and can't do the elimination. We then get a disorganized but sunny elimination hosted and drawn by Bottle that ends with Yellowface and Pillow getting sent away. She doesn't just host the elimination though, because this is Bottle for Dream Island bitch, and she's in the hosting position the whole time. Now some people think this is no contest, the best episode for Bottle. She's the most relevant here, getting a lot of screen time as the host. She has a lot of goofy scenes with that screen time, and there are even some parts that harken back to her emotional awareness. The first comes from her asking for a bull riding machine, where she says,
I'm hosting today to take things off your hands.
This shows that Bottle noticed how 4 has been busy, so she's continuing to host to try and help him out. They did get along well in BFB before the split, so seeing her show that kindness once again is just nice. The second involves Bottle and Winner in the eating challenge. She brings out Loseros as a dish, but then gets frazzled when she remembers how Winner discussed their falling out with Loser in TPOT 10. She apologizes for putting them in an uncomfortable position, offering to change the dish, before quickly rebounding once Winner tells her that it's okay, and how they need to move past this former, but not former anymore, friendship. While it may not be a major aspect of Bottle's character, I'm glad her thoughtfulness is still plain to see with overt moments like this, along with some smaller ones throughout the season. Most of the episode for Bottle is just her usual silly self though, just with more focus. Which brings me back to the idea of how, despite some, probably a majority of people thinking this is her best episode, there are also viewers who think she's pretty annoying here. It's a similar issue to someone like Purpleface, where in moderation he may be fine or whatever to most fans, but having a major presence in so many episodes created a lot of negativity towards him back in BFB post-split. Now, it's not nearly as big of an issue as the one Purple Guy ran into, because, again, a lot of people think this is her best episode, but I think it's interesting to consider how her reception could have took a turn for the worse if she got more episodes revolving around her. And that's coming from someone who quite likes Bottle this episode and really enjoys her hosting. She doesn't host with bias either, since Bagged loses, but the good news for Bottle is that nobody expected her to be in any danger. And this right here, this is what we'd call Bottle's peak. She was finally viewed as not being in any danger of being eliminated, most people loved her, and ever since she started gaining momentum in TPOT 13, it was looking like Bottle could only continue to rise. Unfortunately for her though, this peak is followed by a crash, because after this, we start getting a ton of death flags for Bottle in TPOT 19. The worry starts with not just the inked out sky, but also with how Bottle underperforms in this elimination. Penn getting more votes than her does make sense with the focus he got in TPOT 17 and his popularity, but she ends up trailing 5,000 votes behind Tennis Ball and only claims third safe after her biggest episode to date. TV getting eliminated over Lie was also a bad sign, not just because he's my fave, but she also had the best chances of surviving over him if she happened to face another elimination in an episode without getting a ton of attention. And would you looky here, Bottle doesn't really get a lot of stuff to do this episode, being chased around the hotel by the Force, like she's playing Temple Run. Wait, is that too dated? Let me try again. Chased around the hotel by the Force, like she's playing Subway Surfers. And yeah, this episode isn't a standout one for Bottle, but I still like the comedy she provides in the middle of the episode, before all the major shit that goes down at the end. The problem that Bottle runs into here, though, is just that Bagged loses, which is terrible news for her because of how steep her competition was. Penn and Tennis Ball both got more votes than her after she hosted, and Lai got screen time on both the character and action side of things, all of which contributed to the idea that Bottle was totally cooked going into this elimination. I mean, Tennis Ball's name was getting rallied around, but come on now, let's be for real. And I'm saying that as someone who voted to save Bottle this episode. What can I say? I like an underdog. Plus with TV gone, I had to change things up, and I wanted to see if Bottle could somehow beat the odds again, despite predicting that she was a goner. And sure enough, when TPOT 21 finally revealed the voting results, Bottle was eliminated, falling almost 10,000 votes short of Lai, and somehow getting the exact same amount of votes as Yellowface in TPOT 17? Crazy how that happens. But still, for being seen as absolutely doomed, 27,000 votes is no small amount. It shows how even in her twilight hours, Bottle now has a lot of fans, and compared to her rock bottom beginnings in BFDIA and IDFB, her popularity has majorly increased. So now that we've gone through her whole journey, let's talk about Bottle's role in the entirety of BFDI. She's very much a character who took time to find a rhythm, since BFB1 and current Bottle have very different energies, but once she starts to become consistent, she could be used really well on her own, or as a foil to someone else. That's especially the case once she starts getting into her flow state after TPOT 7, and even more so from TPOT 13 onwards. She's no longer unpopular. After a long and tough road of close eliminations, and based on a poll I did, she has about 74% of voters liking or loving her. That remaining 26% is also interesting though, because it seems like most of the Bottle dislikers feel more neutral towards her, rather than actively hating her, which I think shows her success as a comedic relief, if most people can still tolerate Bottle. As for me though, I think it's pretty obvious given that I voted for her, but I personally quite like Bottle for her personality and comedy. Yet I understand why some may not care for her, since beyond her goofiness, she never contributes a ton to the show. Now this isn't a problem earlier in Teapot, but she gets 14th place, and her only big connections are between Clock and Eraser, not gaining anything new, even after her big hosting role. Other jokey characters like Ruby, BFDIA Nickel, Marker, or even Price Tag are able to feel much more well-rounded because they have their goofiness while also working great as a support character to someone reeled in who they can interact with, and Bottle doesn't have a specific someone. That's no big deal if you love her energy, but if you don't, she doesn't do anything else that would convince you to like her, even in her best episodes, and I wish she had more concrete connections. Expanding more on Bottle's dynamic with Penn and Lai beyond just Teapot 13 and 15 would have been great for her, and trying to link Bottle with Tennis Ball or TV could have made her feel involved with more people, while also making Bagged just feel like a closer team. That being said though, while creating more bonds would have been nice for Bottle, I don't see a path forward for her to go the distance in any world based on her performance after hosting Teapot 17. I mean, there's a good chance she gets eliminated over TV if she doesn't host that episode, and even if Bagged wasn't up for elimination in Teapot 19, at this point in the season, everyone left is just too damn popular for an underdog like Bottle to go any further, meaning that her very quick fall was simply caused by getting outclassed. Nevertheless, while she may be gone now, I'm still impressed that Bottle was able to make it as far as she did, with how often the odds were against her. I wouldn't call her one of my faves, but after not caring about her in BFB, I mean it when I say that I do like Bottle now. She provides great comedy, and with there not really being a way to send anybody to the elimination space in Teapot right now, I hope she's able to get a good send-off, or something extra to do, as we pour one out for Bottle in this season. That's all I gotta say. If you haven't, please subscribe, like, hype, share, hit that bell, comment if you have any thoughts, and thank you for watching.